Please don't forget subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notified of new daily videos.
The email landed in Andrew Vault's inbox at precisely 3:07 p.m., a stark white rectangle against the muted gray of his university portal. For weeks, he'd been checking it obsessively, the anticipation a dull thrum beneath his skin, a counterpoint to the relentless anxiety that had become his constant companion. He'd known deep down what the subject line would say, but a sliver of desperate hope, sharp and defiant, had clung to him anyway. Now there it was, regarding your application to Sterling University, class of 2026. He didn't need to open it. He knew the polite, carefully worded paragraphs. The institution's deep admiration for his academic record, his extracurriculars, his essays that bled quiet ambition and a yearning for a future larger than his current confines. And then the inevitable, while your application was truly exceptional, the sheer volume of highly qualified candidates. Regrettably, we are unable to offer you admission at this time. It was the academic equivalent of a gentle knife twist, precise and bloodless, yet still leaving a gaping wound. Andrew leaned back in his worn desk chair, the cheap faux leather squeaking in protest. His eyes drifted around the small utilitarian dorm room he shared with a roommate who was perpetually absent, likely at a fraternity house or on some ill-advised road trip. Textbooks lay open on his desk, meticulously highlighted notes on ancient history and advanced calculus. The wall above was a constellation of post-it notes, each one a task, a reminder of future possibility he'd meticulously planned. Sterling University had been the brightest star in that constellation, his ticket out, his proof. He stared at the unread email, a bitter taste blooming on his tongue. He had done everything right. He'd sacrificed sleep, social life, even the fleeting moments of peace to maintain his near-perfect GPA. He'd volunteered at the local soup kitchen, tutored struggling students, poured his soul into essays about the transformative power of education, about the yearning to make a tangible difference in a world that often felt indifferent. He'd believed, truly believed, that merit and hard work would carve his path. But merit, he was learning, was often a luxury afforded by privilege. And privilege in the Vault household belonged exclusively to his sister, Clara. A sharp, almost physical pang of resignation settled in his chest. He closed the laptop with a soft click, the screen's reflection of his tired, earnest face winking out. He knew the story his parents, Richard and Sylvia, would spin. "We're so sorry, Andrew, we know how much you wanted this, but you know how tight things are, an Ivy League tuition. It's just not realistic for us right now, we're doing our best." He'd heard it 1,000 times, "We're doing our best." It was their mantra, their shield, their convenient excuse for every disappointment, every denied request, every quiet sacrifice he was expected to make. And yet, the reality of their lives, particularly Clara's, was a stark counter-narrative. Later that evening, the dissonance was screamingly evident. Andrew sat at the kitchen table in the sprawling suburban house that never quite felt like home, picking at a plate of lukewarm pasta. His parents were on the phone, their voices hushed, excited. Richard, always the more theatrical, kept punctuating his end of the conversation with booming laughs, while Sylvia's clipped, elegant tones offered assurances and congratulations. Clara burst through the back door, a shimmering vision of effortless chic. Her blonde hair, recently highlighted, bounced as she moved, and her designer handbag, a recent gift, swung carelessly from her arm. "You guys," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the polished marble foyer. "You will not believe it." Richard and Sylvia dropped their calls simultaneously, their faces alight with a shared, anticipatory joy that Andrew rarely, if ever, saw directed at himself. "What is it, darling?" Sylvia asked, already beaming, hands clasped. Clara pulled a set of keys from her bag, jingling them dramatically. "The apartment, it's mine, signed, sealed, delivered, and look," she swept out to the driveway. A brand-new luxury sedan, sleek and obsidian, gleamed under the porch light. "My new car, I told you, Daddy, the dealership said the papers went through this afternoon and it's practically parked in my name." Richard clapped his hands, a wide, proud grin splitting his face. "Excellent, only the best for my little girl. Top floor, Riverview lofts, perfect for a young woman of Clara's ambition, and a car that truly reflects her success." Sylvia rushed forward, embracing Clara in a tangle of expensive perfume and happy tears. "Oh, my beautiful Clara, your new life truly begins now. This is what you deserve, darling. All the hard work, it's paid off." Andrew watched from the kitchen doorway, the pasta forgotten. Clara, who spent more time on TikTok than in a library. Clara, whose ambition mostly involved elaborate brunch plans and boutique shopping. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut. The Ivy League rejection, still a fresh wound, throbbed. He knew what these gifts represented: a down payment on a luxury apartment, a top-tier lease on an imported car. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. The kind of money that would have made his sterling university dreams not just realistic, but a certainty. He cleared his throat. "Mom, Dad," he started, his voice a little hoarse. "I got the letter from Sterling today." The beaming smiles faltered, then dissolved. Richard's face, so recently flushed with pride, flattened into a look of weary disapproval. Sylvia's arms dropped from Clara and she turned, her expression carefully neutral, bordering on annoyed. "Oh, Andrew," Sylvia sighed, a familiar lament in her tone. "We told you it was a long shot. You know we just don't have that kind of money, sweetheart, not for a school that exorbitant. We're barely keeping our heads above water, what with the incident a few years back." The incident, a vague, undefined financial setback they often referenced, always without details, always when Andrew asked for something. It was their all-purpose economic boogeyman. "But you just bought Clara an apartment and a car," Andrew pressed, the unfairness burning his throat. He hated the whining tone he heard in his own voice, but he couldn't stop it. Richard stiffened, his jaw tightening. "That's different, Andrew. Clara has worked very hard at establishing herself. She deserves a fresh start. These are investments in her future. Yours, well, you'll do fine at State. Plenty of brilliant minds go to State." He said State like it was a consolation prize for the academically mediocre, a place you went when you didn't quite measure up. Clara, oblivious, interjected, "Yeah, Andrew, like you'll be fine. Plus, I need a new place. This house is like so small now, and my old car was practically falling apart." She gestured dismissively toward the meticulously maintained sedan he had driven for years. Andrew felt a cold wave of something akin to despair wash over him. It wasn't just the money. It was the absolute casual dismissal of his ambitions, the complete lack of understanding of what Sterling represented to him, coupled with the lavish, uncritical celebration of Clara's far lesser achievements. He was the perpetual afterthought, the inconvenient truth in their carefully curated narrative of prosperity. He retreated to his room, the sounds of Clara's excited chatter and his parents' doting responses filtering through the closed door. The Ivy League dream was dead. But in its place, a new, desperate idea took root. He would apply for every single financial aid program available, scholarships, grants, loans, anything. He would prove that he deserved this, even if he had to fight for it alone. He would pull himself up by his own bootstraps, as his father always preached, though Richard's boots seemed to be made of imported Italian leather, and Andrew's, well, Andrew's were hand-me-downs. The email from the university's financial aid office arrived a week later. This one wasn't a rejection. It was far, far worse. The subject line was blunt: urgent, financial aid application review discrepancy flagged. Andrew's heart hitched. He clicked it open, his brow furrowed in confusion. He'd painstakingly detailed every penny of his meager savings, estimated his parents' stated income, described his own part-time job earnings. There shouldn't be any discrepancies. The body of the email was formal, curt, laced with a barely concealed accusation. "Dear Mr. Vault, your recent application for federal and institutional financial aid has been flagged for a significant and unresolvable discrepancy regarding declared assets. Our preliminary review, cross-referenced with various public and financial databases, indicates that you are currently listed as the beneficiary of a trust holding assets in excess of $4 million, $4 million US. This substantial asset declaration renders you ineligible for the financial aid you have requested, and furthermore, raises serious concerns regarding potential fraud in your application, as these assets were not disclosed. We require immediate clarification and documentation to resolve this matter. Failure to provide adequate explanation within 48 hours will result in the permanent suspension of your application and potential referral to relevant authorities for investigation into fraudulent claims. Sincerely, Financial Aid Review Board, Sterling University." Andrew read it once, then again and again. His brain simply couldn't process the words. $4 million linked to him. It was a joke, a mistake, a cruel prank. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, but the numbers didn't change. $4 million. He felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. Fraud? He, Andrew Vault, the perpetually overlooked, the one who always followed the rules, the one who tried so hard to be good. He wouldn't even know how to commit financial fraud. He barely understood how his checking account worked. Panic began to set in, a visceral, sickening dread. He thought of his parents. The financial hardship, the incident, the new car, the apartment for Clara. Was this it? Had he somehow unwittingly stumbled upon some hidden family secret, a secret that involved his name and millions of dollars? He typed his full name into a search engine, then Andrew Vault Trust Fund, Andrew Vault Inheritance. Nothing. Only academic achievements, a few local newspaper mentions for volunteer work, no financial records, no public trusts. It was as if the internet, for all its omniscience, had no idea who this financially solvent Andrew Vault was, which he thought bitterly aligned perfectly with his own perception of himself. He printed the email, his hands shaking slightly, and clutched it like an incriminating artifact. He had to confront them. He had to know. This wasn't some minor discrepancy. This was a monumental accusation threatening his future, his reputation, everything he'd ever worked for. Richard was in his study, a leather-bound book open on his lap, though Andrew suspected he was merely posing for effect. Sylvia was in the living room, scrolling through a tablet, humming softly. The house, usually a quiet mausoleum of good taste, felt suddenly suffocating. Andrew approached his father first, his voice thin. "Dad, can I talk to you for a second?" Richard looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "Yes, Andrew, is something wrong?" He had a way of asking if something was wrong that implied Andrew himself was the source of the problem. Andrew handed him the printed email. This came from Sterling's financial aid office. Richard took it, his eyes scanning the page, his expression shifting from mild irritation to a strange, almost imperceptible flicker of apprehension. His jaw, which had been relaxed, began to tighten. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing its customary smooth timbre. Sylvia, sensing a shift in the domestic atmosphere, floated in from the living room. "What's wrong, darling? Andrew, what have you done?" "I haven't done anything," Andrew insisted, his frustration mounting. "They're saying I'm linked to a trust fund, millions of dollars, and that I'm committing fraud by asking for financial aid." Sylvia snatched the paper from Richard's hand, her eyes darting across the text. Her elegant composure began to fray at the edges, a sharp, almost violent intake of breath. "What?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "This is preposterous. $4 million. Andrew, what absolute nonsense is this?" "I don't know," Andrew exclaimed, throwing his hands up. "That's what I'm asking you. Is there some mistake? Is this about the incident? Are we secretly rich and you just didn't tell me?" The last question came out sharper than he intended, tinged with a lifetime of resentment. Richard slammed his book shut, the sound echoing in the quiet study. "Don't be ridiculous, Andrew," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Secretly rich? Do you think we'd be living this modest life if we had $4 million just lying around?" He gestured vaguely at their sprawling, tastefully decorated home, the manicured gardens, the luxury cars in the driveway, a life that to Andrew seemed far from modest. "Then why does this say I'm linked to it?" Andrew pressed, pointing at the offending line. "It's my name, Andrew Vault." Sylvia's face was a mask of cold fury. "This is clearly a clerical error, a glitch in their system. These university bureaucracies are utterly incompetent, darling. You know that. They make mistakes all the time." "A $4 million mistake?" Andrew challenged, skepticism warring with a desperate need to believe them. They were his parents. They wouldn't lie to him about something this fundamental, would they? "Yes, exactly," Richard boomed, seizing on Sylvia's narrative. "It's a computer error. Someone has clearly mixed up your file with someone else's. It's an inconvenience, nothing more. Write them back. Tell them they've made a terrible mistake. Tell them we are absolutely not wealthy, that we are in fact quite stretched." He paused, a theatrical sigh escaping him. "This, Andrew, is precisely why we told you not to bother with those applications. They're nothing but trouble. You should have just gone to state like we suggested." "But they're threatening to report me for fraud," Andrew said, his voice barely a whisper. "And permanent suspension, my academic record." "Don't be so dramatic," Sylvia snapped, her voice cracking with an edge of hysteria. "It's a scare tactic, just ignore it, it will blow over." She grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes, usually so placid, were wide with an emotion Andrew couldn't quite decipher, fear maybe, or a desperate kind of anger. "What you must not do, Andrew, is investigate this further. Do you understand me? You do not go digging around, you do not contact anyone else. You absolutely do not go to City Hall or any other government agency. You will ruin everything. You'll ruin us." "Ruin what?" Andrew asked, bewildered by the intensity of their reaction. Their insistence on calling it a glitch while simultaneously threatening dire consequences for him investigating it felt like a jarring discord. It was a familiar dance, their dismissiveness of his concerns, their manipulation to control his actions, their vague warnings of catastrophe. But this time the stakes felt terrifyingly high. Richard stepped forward, his expression hardening into a familiar paternalistic menace. "Andrew, listen to your mother. We've been through enough. This family has been through enough. Don't you dare stir up old wounds. Don't you dare create more trouble. This is a private family matter and you will leave it alone." His eyes bore into Andrew's, cold and unyielding. You're making a mountain out of a molehill as usual. Now go to your room. This conversation is over. Andrew stared at them, a cold dread washing over him. The way they spoke, the raw panic beneath their forced calm, the way they twisted his concern into an accusation of him making trouble, it all screamed of a lie. But what kind of lie involved millions of dollars and his name? He felt a profound sense of isolation. His own parents, who should have been his protectors, were closing ranks against him, their faces set in an unreadable mixture of anger and fear. He retreated, the financial aid letter crumpled in his hand, his Ivy League dreams not just dead, but now replaced by a chilling premonition of something far more sinister. 2 days later, Andrew received a phone call. It wasn't from Sterling University, it wasn't from his parents. It was from a private number, an unfamiliar area code. He almost didn't answer. He was still reeling from the confrontation, a cold, empty feeling in his stomach as he replayed his parents' bizarre, aggressive denial. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Andrew Vault." The voice on the other end was calm, measured, distinctly professional. A man's voice, deep and resonant with an almost old-world formality. "Yes, speaking," Andrew said, a prickle of unease running down his spine. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm a solicitor and I represent the estate of Marcus Thorne. I believe we have a rather urgent matter to discuss." Andrew froze. Uncle Marcus. His mother's estranged brother, the eccentric uncle who had vanished from their lives years ago, only ever mentioned in hushed tones or with a dismissive wave of his mother's hand. The only family member who had ever seemed to genuinely see Andrew even in his quietest moments. Marcus, who had sent him arcane books and strange, beautiful geodes for his birthdays, rather than the sensible clothes or gift cards Clara received. Andrew had loved him fiercely in secret, but he had died 5 years ago. Or so his parents had told him. A brief, vague mention of a sudden illness, a quiet funeral Andrew wasn't allowed to attend because he was too young and it was too upsetting. "Uncle Marcus," Andrew stammered, his mind racing. "But he passed away years ago. What could there possibly be to discuss?" There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, almost as if Sterling was gathering his thoughts, preparing for a difficult delivery. "Mr. Vault," Sterling began, his voice softening just a fraction, "I understand this may be difficult to hear, but your parents, Richard and Sylvia Thorne, informed you of your uncle's passing. They did not inform you of the full scope of his will, nor, I'm afraid, of your own rather unique circumstances in relation to it." Andrew gripped the phone tighter, knuckles white. "What do you mean, unique circumstances?" He felt a cold dread curling in his stomach. This sounded far too close to the financial aid letter, to his parents' panicked warnings. "Mr. Vault," Sterling continued, his tone now grave, "I must ask you to sit down if you are not already. What I am about to tell you is unprecedented and quite frankly appalling." Andrew sank onto the edge of his bed, the cheap mattress springs groaning under his weight. "Just tell me," he whispered. "5 years ago, Mr. Vault," Sterling stated, each word delivered with the careful precision of a surgeon, "on October 12th, the city registry office received a death certificate for one Andrew Vault, born on your exact birth date, matching your social security number. It cited an unfortunate sudden illness. Your parents, Richard and Sylvia Thorne, were listed as the next of kin. They proceeded to arrange a funeral, submit a probate claim, and successfully execute your uncle Marcus Thorne's will. A will which, in its entirety, named you as the sole beneficiary of his considerable estate. A multi-million-dollar inheritance, including several commercial properties and a substantial trust fund, intended for your education and future." Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. The room spun. "What?" he croaked, his voice barely audible. "That's impossible. I'm right here. I'm alive. I'm not dead." He laughed, a short, hysterical sound, disbelieving. "You must have the wrong Andrew Vault." "I assure you, Mr. Vault, I do not. The records are painstakingly clear. And the reason I am contacting you now after 5 years is that a dormant alert placed by your uncle's forethought was triggered by your recent financial aid application. The system flagged the discrepancy, a legally deceased individual attempting to apply for student loans. This, combined with the fact that the primary beneficiary of the Marcus Thorne Trust, Andrew Vault, had been declared dead, while another Andrew Vault was very much alive and applying for aid, finally brought this to my attention. Your uncle, it seems, knew his siblings better than I gave him credit for. He built in certain checks, certain safeguards, to be triggered if the inheritance was accessed in a manner inconsistent with his wishes regarding your future." Andrew felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Legally dead. The words echoed in his skull, cold and clinical. His parents, Richard and Sylvia, had declared him dead. They had forged a death certificate, forged his life away, stolen his uncle's inheritance, the financial aid letter, the $4 million. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening thud. "My parents, they did this," Andrew whispered, the betrayal a physical ache in his chest. "Yes, Mr. Vault, they did, and in doing so, they have not only defrauded you of your rightful inheritance, but in the eyes of the law, they have erased your very existence. You are, legally speaking, a ghost, a phantom in the system." Sterling paused, allowing the enormity of the statement to sink in. "We need to meet immediately in person and in complete confidence. There is a great deal to discuss and a truly monumental task ahead of us to resurrect you both legally and financially." Andrew couldn't speak. He could only stare blankly at the wall, the world tilting violently on its axis. He was dead. His parents had killed him, and for 5 years he had been walking around, breathing, living, completely oblivious to the fact that he was, quite literally, unwritten. The sheer dizzying unreality of it propelled Andrew out of the house. He needed proof. He needed to see it, to touch it, to have some official source confirm this monstrous, impossible lie. He drove aimlessly for a while, the cityscape a blur through the tears that pricked his eyes, until he found himself in the city's downtown core, staring up at the monolithic neoclassical edifice of City Hall. His parents had expressly forbidden him from coming here. That in itself was a powerful, terrible confirmation. Inside City Hall was a labyrinth of echoing marble halls and hushed bureaucratic cubicles. He wandered, disoriented, until he found the Vital Records Department, a section tucked away in a less grand, more utilitarian wing. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a testament to the countless lives recorded and filed away here. "Can I help you?" a woman with spectacles perched on her nose asked, her voice flat. Andrew tried to speak, but his throat was tight. I need to see a death certificate," he finally managed, the words catching in his throat. "Name of the deceased?" she asked, not looking up from her computer. Andrew swallowed. "Andrew Vault, date of birth October 23, 2000. He gave his own birthday, the one he had just celebrated. The woman typed, her fingers moving swiftly, "and date of deaths." Andrew hesitated. He didn't know he was supposed to be alive. I don't have it. It was recent or not recent. It's complicated." The woman sighed, a puff of exasperation. "Sir, we have thousands of records. You need a date of death, or at least an approximate year to narrow it down." 5 years ago, Andrew offered, remembering Sterling's words. Around 5 years ago. She typed again. A few moments passed, the only sound the click of the keyboard. Then a low hum from a printer as a single sheet of paper emerged. She held it up, peering at it. "Andrew Vault," she read, her voice expressionless. "Born October 23, 2000, deceased October 12, 2018. She slid the paper across the counter. "Is this the one?" Andrew stared down at the document. A pristine official city name death certificate, his name, his birth date, and then in stark, undeniable black and white the date of his death. October 12, 2018, 5 years ago, a sudden unknown illness. His parents, Richard and Sylvia Thorne, listed as informants, cause of death, cardiac arrest, signed by a Dr. Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne, he didn't know anyone named Elias Thorne, another piece of the forgery. His vision blurred, he felt faint, the ground beneath him swaying. He was looking at his own death certificate, an official document. This wasn't a glitch, this wasn't a misunderstanding, this was real, and it was horrific. I'm sorry," he mumbled, gripping the edge of the counter to steady himself. "This can't be right. I'm Andrew Vault, I'm right here." He held out his driver's license, his hand trembling. The woman glanced at his license, then back at the death certificate, a flicker of something unreadable, confusion, maybe a touch of alarm crossing her face. "Sir, I just printed this from the official registry. This is the record for Andrew Vault, born October 23, 2000. If you are that Andrew Vault, then I don't know what to tell you." She looked uncomfortable, as if he were either mentally unstable or attempting some bizarre fraud himself. He couldn't stand there, he had to get out. He grabbed the death certificate, uncaring if it was allowed, and stumbled away from the counter, past the rows of filing cabinets, a ghost amongst the living. He needed air. He pushed through the heavy doors and onto the street, the bustling city suddenly a cacophony of meaningless noise. He was dead. His own parents had murdered his identity, sold him for an inheritance. The Ivy League rejection, Clara's new car, the financial aid fraud flag, all of it now made a grotesque, terrifying sense. He was alive, breathing, walking, but in the eyes of the law, he was a corpse, a non-person. He barely noticed the young man who had been watching him from a nearby cubicle, a junior archivist named Oliver Dyson. Oliver had seen countless tales of bureaucratic absurdity, of lives tangled in red tape, but this was different. The sheer, naked shock on Andrew's face, the desperate, trembling hand presenting a driver's license in contradiction to a freshly printed death certificate, it had arrested Oliver's usual cynicism. Oliver had quietly followed Andrew's interaction, watching the death certificate print, seeing the woman's growing discomfort. He'd even taken the liberty of cross-referencing a few other databases on his system, deep in the hidden subdepartments known informally as Will, the clandestine identity hub. What he'd found had sent a cold shiver down his spine. The death certificate was meticulously crafted, almost perfect. The name of the doctor, Elias Thorne, was a registered, though now retired, physician with a seemingly unblemished record, a distant relative of the Thorne family on Richard's side, though that connection wasn't publicly visible. There were even fabricated funeral invoices for a small, private service. It was a professional job designed to fool any initial inquiry. The kind of fraud that almost never got caught unless a specific, targeted alert like the one Sterling described was in place. Oliver watched Andrew stumble out, clutching his own death certificate like a burning brand. He saw the utter devastation on the young man's face, a look of profound existential loss. It was not just financial fraud, it was a fundamental violation of identity. Oliver, usually content to observe the absurdities of the system from a safe distance, felt a rare stirring of something else. A desire to help, to peel back the layers of this particular egregious injustice. This living ghost was real, and his story needed to be written back into existence. Andrew found himself at a bus stop, though he had no idea where he was going. He stared at the death certificate in his hand, his own existence reduced to a piece of paper, a lie. His parents, his own flesh and blood, had stripped him of everything, his name, his future, his very being. He was a shadow, an echo, a phantom. But Arthur Sterling's voice, calm and resolute, returned to him, a monumental task ahead of us to resurrect you. He had to call Sterling. He had to fight. He had to become real again. His unwritten life had just begun. The sterile hum of Arthur Sterling's waiting room had done little to calm the frantic thrumming in Andrew's chest. Just hours ago, Oliver Dyson, a junior archivist whose worn tweed jacket and knowing eyes had belied his unassuming title, had stared at Andrew across a metal desk, a falsified death certificate clutched between them like a ghost. Andrew Vault, deceased, date 5 years prior. The words had scrawled themselves across Andrew's mind, an indelible tattoo of non-existence. Now the weight of that spectral declaration pressed down on him, making the plush armchair feel like a slab of stone. He was here because Arthur Sterling, the solicitor for his eccentric, long-dead Uncle Marcus, had called, his voice grave, cutting through the thin veil of Andrew's denial. A quiet click and a woman in a severe, tailored suit smiled politely from the doorway. "Mr. Vault, Mr. Sterling will see you now." Andrew rose, his legs feeling oddly disconnected from his torso. He followed her down a hushed corridor, past frosted glass offices, the muffled murmur of conversations like distant waves. The air in Sterling & Associates, located high in the prestigious Sterling Tower, felt weighty with unspoken consequence, a stark contrast to the carefree student life he had imagined for himself just weeks ago. Arthur Sterling's office was not what Andrew had expected. Instead of a cavernous, imposing space, it was surprisingly compact, though impeccably furnished. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and a single, large window framing a breathtaking view of the city's financial district gave it an air of quiet authority. Sterling himself, a man in his late 50s with kind but shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, rose from behind a mahogany desk. His thinning silver hair was meticulously combed, and his suit, though conservative, spoke of understated quality. He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Andrew, thank you for coming." Sterling's voice was calm, a balm to Andrew's frayed nerves. "Please sit." Andrew sank into the chair, gripping the armrests. "Mr. Sterling," he managed, his voice raspy. I don't understand," Oliver said, "about the death certificate. Is this some kind of mistake, a prank?" The desperate hope in his own voice was pathetic even to him. Sterling's expression softened, but his gaze was unwavering. "Andrew, I assure you this is no prank. Unfortunately, it is a grave and deliberate act of fraud." He paused, allowing the words to hang in the air. "I was the solicitor for your late Uncle Marcus. Upon his passing 5 years ago, he left a substantial estate, the bulk of which was placed into a trust with you as the sole beneficiary." Andrew blinked. "Uncle Marcus, he left me money, but my parents said he left nothing. They said he was practically a pauper, just a eccentric distant relative." The memories of his parents' casual dismissals of his uncle, their veiled contempt, now took on a sinister hue. Sterling leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. Uncle Marcus was indeed eccentric but far from a pauper. He was a shrewd investor, particularly in urban real estate before the recent boom. He accumulated a significant portfolio of commercial properties and other assets. His will was explicit, Andrew. The trust was established for your education, your future, to ensure you had the means to pursue your dreams without impediment. He picked up a thick file, its cover embossed with the firm's logo. It was valued at approximately $4,250,000 at the time of his death. Andrew felt a dizzying lurch in his stomach. $4,250,000. His parents had said they couldn't afford Ivy League tuition. They had watched him scrape by, working part-time jobs while Clara flaunted new designer clothes and drove a luxury car. He thought of the desperate financial aid application, the impossible assets. But the money, where is it? Sterling's gaze hardened. That is the crux of the matter. Your parents, Richard and Sylvia Thorne, forged a death certificate for you. They submitted it to the probate court, along with falsified funeral invoices and other fraudulent documentation, to claim you had died. This allowed them to petition the court to release the trust funds to them as your legal guardians, citing their duty to manage your estate following your untimely demise. The air thickened, pressing on Andrew's chest. He couldn't breathe. They killed him, legally, for money. The enormity of the betrayal was a physical blow. He thought of their dismissive tones, their constant praise for Clara, their barely concealed irritation at his existence. Was this why? Was he always just an inconvenient obstacle to their greed? The trust was emptied, Andrew, Sterling continued, his voice softer now, almost regretful. Or rather, almost emptied. Over the past 5 years, they have systematically drawn down the funds. Extravagant vacations, luxury vehicles, the renovation and upkeep of their estate, investments in Clara's lifestyle, her apartment, her university tuition, her allowance. All funded by what was rightfully yours. Andrew felt a cold, bitter laugh bubble up, quickly stifled. Clara, his golden child sister whose every whim was indulged, she was living his life. The thought twisted in his gut. The university rejection, the financial aid flag, Andrew whispered, the pieces clicking into a grotesque, horrifying mosaic. It was because the trust was still nominally linked to me, wasn't it, even though they'd drained it? Sterling nodded slowly. Precisely. A dormancy alert, an anomaly in the system. The university's financial aid office, quite rightly, flagged a student declared deceased 5 years ago suddenly applying for aid with links to millions in assets. Their inquiry, however, also triggered a latent alert I had placed on the trust should any unusual activity occur. Your parents were meticulous, but they were not infallible. He paused, allowing Andrew to absorb the information. The total value of the assets they have dissipated from the trust amounts to just under $4 million. $4 million. It wasn't an abstract number anymore. It was 5 years of his life, his education, his future meticulously siphoned away, transformed into his sister's designer handbag and his parents' country club membership. What do we do? Andrew finally asked, the question a desperate plea. Sterling's expression became firm, professional. We fight. I have already drafted an emergency injunction. It will be filed this afternoon. This order will immediately freeze any remaining assets in the trust, as well as any accounts or properties demonstrably purchased with those funds. It will also halt any ongoing transactions linked to the trust or your parents' major holdings. Andrew pictured his parents, always so smug, so confident in their wealth. What will that mean for them? A faint, almost imperceptible hardening around Sterling's mouth. It will mean a sudden, severe financial shock. Their credit cards may be declined, property sales may be halted, their entire financial house of cards will begin to crumble. A flicker of something dark, something akin to satisfaction, ignited in Andrew's chest, quickly overshadowed by the profound grief for his stolen existence. And for me. For you, Andrew, it means a long and arduous battle to reclaim your identity. We will petition the court to legally nullify your death certificate, restore your legal existence, and seek full restitution for the funds stolen from you. This will be an unprecedented case, but we have irrefutable evidence. Uncle Marcus foresaw the possibility of impropriety. He knew his brother, Richard, was a man of questionable ethics. He took precautions, which allowed me to track the funds as effectively as I did. He left a trail. Sterling continued to speak, outlining legal strategies, potential timelines, the need for forensic accountants and identity specialists. Andrew listened, but it was as if a pane of glass separated him from the words. He was a ghost listening to his own eulogy, a financial one. I understand this is overwhelming, Andrew, Sterling said, his voice cutting through the fog. This level of betrayal is almost incomprehensible, but you are not alone. We will get through this. First, we need to gather all possible documentation, and I have 2 referrals for you, both essential. One is for the practicalities of rebuilding your identity beyond the courtroom, and the other for the emotional toll this will undoubtedly take. Andrew merely nodded, his mind reeling. The city lights outside Sterling's window seemed to blur, reflecting a life that had moved on without him, a life he now had to claw back from the void. The emergency injunction hit Richard and Sylvia Thorne like a freight train, a silent, invisible force that shattered their meticulously curated world. It started subtly, insidiously, a whisper of unease before roaring into an undeniable calamity. They were at the Azure Pearl, an exclusive seafood restaurant renowned for its exorbitant prices and discreet booths, celebrating Clara's latest academic achievement, a B+ in an elective art history course. Richard, portly and red-faced from an expensive Bordeaux, was regaling Sylvia and Clara with tales of his latest real estate conquest, a multi-million-dollar commercial property known as the Echo Block, which he had been quietly liquidating from Marcus's estate, already pre-sold to a developer. Sylvia, resplendent in a sapphire gown, preened, basking in the reflected glow of her husband's ostentatious success. Clara, oblivious, was scrolling through her phone, occasionally offering a practiced, saccharine smile. When the waiter presented the bill, Sylvia, with a flourish, handed over her platinum credit card, the same one Andrew knew had a practically limitless spending allowance. She watched, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips as the waiter slid it through the machine. His brow furrowed. "I'm afraid, madam, it appears to have been declined." Sylvia's smile faltered. "Declined? Nonsense, try it again, it's a platinum card." She spoke with the imperious certainty of someone who had never heard that word directed at her finances. The waiter, well-versed in the subtle art of handling embarrassed patrons, tried again. The machine chirped the same unforgiving refusal. "Still declined, madam. Perhaps you have another card." Richard, overhearing, bristled. "What is this? My wife's card never declines." He pulled out his own corporate black card, slapping it onto the tray. "Try this one." The waiter, now visibly uncomfortable, obliged. The same chirping sound, the same red text on the screen, declined. A hush fell over their booth. Clara looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with uncharacteristic alarm. Richard's face, already flushed, deepened to an alarming crimson. Sylvia snatched back her card, her perfectly manicured hand trembling slightly. "There must be a system error," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "This is an outrage." They fumbled for their wallets, pulling out other cards. A Visa, a MasterCard, a secondary corporate card, each met with the same humiliating rejection. Their carefully constructed facade of effortless wealth began to crack, the veneer of composure peeling away in the face of such public, undeniable financial impotence. They eventually had to use a seldom-used personal debit card, drained almost dry, to cover the meal, leaving a pitiful tip. Their celebratory dinner ended in a silent, seething fury. The chaos escalated the next morning. Richard received a frantic call from his real estate agent. "The deal for the Echo Block has been halted, Mr. Thorne. An injunction. They've ripped the for sale signs right off the building. The buyers are threatening to sue for breach of contract." At the Gilded Enclave, their sprawling mansion, Sylvia was on the phone, her voice shrill with panic. Her online shopping cart, filled with thousands of dollars of designer clothes, had been emptied, the transactions reversed. An automated email from the bank informed them that all major lines of credit had been suspended pending a legal review. Their personal bank accounts, usually overflowing, showed a precipitous drop, and a significant portion of their available cash had been frozen. "It's Andrew," Sylvia shrieked, slamming the phone down. "It has to be him, that ingrate, he must have done something." Richard, packing the imported marble foyer, ran a hand through his thinning hair, his face ashen. "But how? The university was a dead end. We told him it was a glitch. He wouldn't dare. He's too meek, too useless." The insult, usually so easy, felt hollow, powerless in the face of this sudden, crippling reality. The sheer audacity of Andrew's parents, the calculated cruelty, was not something Andrew fully processed until the calls started coming. Richard and Sylvia, reeling from the sudden financial strangulation, had immediately resorted to their tried-and-true weapon, social manipulation. They began to spin a narrative, a carefully crafted web of half-truths and manufactured victimhood, casting Andrew as the villain. His phone, usually a silent companion, began to buzz with a relentless urgency. First, it was his Aunt Carol, Sylvia's sister, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Andrew dear, what is this I'm hearing? Your poor mother is beside herself. Richard says you're suing them over some financial misunderstanding. Surely you can talk this through. Family is everything, you know." Next, it was Mr. Henderson, a fellow parishioner from the Golden Bell Chapel, a man who had always barely acknowledged Andrew's existence. "Son, I heard what you're doing to your parents. They've done so much for this community. Given you a home and education, it's a mistake, Andrew, a big mistake. You need to drop this nonsense before you destroy everything. The messages accumulated, saccharine texts from distant cousins, stern voicemails from family friends, even a curt email from a professor Andrew admired, clearly influenced by his parents' version of events. Ungrateful. Mistake. Tearing the family apart. Think of your poor sister. They were the flying monkeys, a term Andrew had once read in a psychology article, now vividly personified by his parents' social circle, unleashed to pressure him into submission. Andrew tried to respond to a few to explain, but his attempts were met with dismissal, gaslighting, or outright anger. You're just making excuses, Andrew. Your parents are good people. The narrative was already set, the judgment cast. He stopped answering, stopped reading, the incessant buzzing a constant reminder of their malicious control. It deepened his sense of isolation, pushing him further into the unreal reality Sterling had just revealed. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of public opinion, a ghost accused of haunting. Sterling, anticipating this, had warned him. They will try to discredit you, Andrew. They will play the victim. They will use their influence. Ignore them. Their words are designed to wound and manipulate to make you doubt yourself. We will speak through the court, not through gossip. The advice was practical, but the emotional sting was real. The knowledge that his entire life had been a lie, that his parents had gone to such lengths to erase him, amplified the pain of being publicly vilified for simply existing. The meeting with Thompson Uchida felt like stepping into a different dimension. Arthur Sterling had explained that while the legal fight was crucial, Andrew also needed to be digitally reconstructed, to exist as a verifiable, living person in the unseen currents of the modern world. Thompson is unconventional, Sterling had cautioned, a slight smile playing on his lips. But he's the best there is. If anyone can make a ghost leave a digital footprint, it's him. Andrew followed Sterling's precise, slightly cryptic directions, an address in the forgotten industrial fringe of the city, a disused warehouse, a specific unmarked side door. Inside, a narrow, rickety staircase led upwards. The air grew cooler, infused with the faint metallic tang of ozone and the deep, pervasive hum of electronics. At the top, behind a heavy, soundproof door, was the cipher room. It was a paradox of a space. Raw concrete walls juxtaposed with glowing holographic displays, intricate networks of fiber optics, and custom-built workstations. Thompson Uchida himself, a man in his late 30s with intense, intelligent eyes and a quiet, almost spectral presence, emerged from the labyrinth of screens. He was lean, dressed in dark, functional clothing, and moved with the silent economy of someone constantly aware of his surroundings. Mr. Vault, Thompson said, his voice low and smooth, devoid of inflection. He extended a hand, his grip surprisingly firm. Arthur told me about your unique situation, a living ghost. It's a rare one even for me. Andrew felt a chill. You've dealt with this before. Thompson gestured to a small, isolated seating area amidst the technological marvels. Variations, identity theft, people faking their own deaths, people trying to disappear, but parents orchestrating their child's legal demise. That's a new level of depravity. And it means your digital footprint has been meticulously scrubbed, or perhaps never fully formed in the first place, to support the narrative of your non-existence. He pulled up a holographic display that shimmered with lines of code, network diagrams, and what looked like a global map of interconnected data points. Your parents didn't just forge a death certificate. They ensured you left no digital trace of a continued existence. No active bank accounts, no utility bills in your name, no credit history, no social security activity, no digital presence beyond that dormant financial aid flag. To the digital world, you effectively ceased to exist 5 years ago, just as the physical records attest. Andrew stared at the swirling data, a profound sense of emptiness washing over him. So, what do we do? We begin the resurrection, Thompson stated, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. It's a meticulous, multi-layered process. First, we establish a new verifiable digital identity, secure email addresses, encrypted communications, new bank accounts that are entirely separate from your past. Then we begin to reconstruct your digital footprint. We'll need to generate proof of life. Utility bills, small financial transactions, online activity that can be independently verified. We'll start with low-level, untraceable data, slowly building up a robust, undeniable presence. Thompson explained that he would guide Andrew through setting up new digital accounts, securing his privacy, and creating an irrefutable paper trail of his continued existence. He spoke of metadata, IP addresses, biometric scans, and the subtle art of leaving digital breadcrumbs that couldn't be disputed. He even mentioned creating physical identity documents that, while not official until the court case was settled, would serve as stepping stones for a provisional existence. This isn't about just changing your name, Andrew, Thompson continued, his voice barely above a whisper, almost lost in the hum of the servers. This is about proving you are. It's about creating a reality that the digital world and eventually the legal world cannot deny. It's a long game. But by the time your legal case reaches its peak, we will have an overwhelming body of digital evidence to support your physical existence. It will be undeniable. Andrew felt a strange mix of apprehension and awe. Thompson was an architect of reality, a digital necromancer. He was building Andrew a new existence, one line of code, one data point at a time. It felt surreal, like assembling a ghost into a tangible form. Thompson then handed Andrew a discreetly branded, encrypted tablet. This will be your lifeline, our primary communication. I'll send you the first set of tasks, small things, mundane but critical. As Andrew left the cipher room, the sounds of the industrial district seemed muted, distant. He clutched the tablet, a tangible link to his nascent, digitally reborn self. The weight of non-existence was slowly, subtly being countered by the meticulous work of a man who dealt in shadows and data, a ghost himself, helping Andrew become real again. Arthur Sterling had been insistent. Andrew, what you're going through isn't just a legal battle, it's a profound psychological trauma. I've referred you to Kendall Newman. She specializes in identity reclamation and familial betrayal. Please make the appointment. Andrew had resisted. He felt numb, enraged, but not traumatized. He was a problem solver, not a patient. But the relentless onslaught of the flying monkeys, the cold dread of his erased existence, the surreal nature of Thompson's work, it all chipped away at his stoicism. Eventually, he called. The Stillpink Clinic was a revelation. Tucked away in a renovated brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street, it exuded a sense of profound calm. The air inside was subtly scented with lavender and cedar, a gentle trickling of water from a hidden feature filling the silence. Soft, indirect lighting bathed natural wood and muted fabric textures, creating spaces that felt both private and profoundly supportive. It was the antithesis of the cold, hard world he had been thrust into. Kendall Newman was younger than Andrew expected, perhaps in her early 30s. Her gaze was warm, empathetic, and utterly unjudgmental. She had kind eyes, a gentle smile, and an aura of quiet strength. She wore comfortable, professional attire, and her voice was soft, melodic. Andrew, thank you for coming, she said, her voice a balm. Please make yourself comfortable. Andrew settled into a plush, ergonomically designed armchair, feeling its soft give. He looked around the room, noticing a small indoor rock garden, art depicting themes of metamorphosis, and a selection of books on trauma recovery. It felt safe, almost sacred. Mr. Sterling told me a little about your situation, Kendall began, her voice steady. But I want you to know everything you share here is confidential. This is your space, your time. There's no right or wrong way to feel. Andrew took a deep breath, the scent of lavender filling his lungs. I don't know where to start, he admitted, the words catching in his throat. You can start anywhere, Kendall encouraged, her gaze unwavering. Tell me what it's like to learn you've been legally dead for 5 years. The question unlocked a dam. Andrew started talking, slowly at first, then with a torrent of words. He spoke of the initial disbelief, the numb shock, the feeling of unreality. He recounted Oliver's stunned expression, Sterling's methodical explanation, the cold, hard facts of the forged death certificate. It's like my entire past is a lie, Andrew choked out, the words raw, aching. Every memory, every interaction with them, it was all overshadowed by this monstrous secret. I thought they just didn't care for me as much as Clara. I always felt like an outsider, a burden, but to find out they literally erased me. It's not just about the money, Ms. Newman, it's about my existence. Kendall listened patiently, occasionally offering a gentle nod or a soft hum of understanding. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix anything, just allowed him to speak, to unravel the tangled knots of his emotions. The hardest part is the betrayal, Andrew continued, his voice thick with unshed tears. Not just that they stole from me, but that they orchestrated my non-existence. They pretended I died, they grieved for a phantom, a legal fiction, all while I was alive, trying to make them proud, trying to figure out why I wasn't enough. His voice cracked. They killed their own son, Ms. Newman, not physically, but existentially. Kendall leaned forward slightly. That's a profound loss, Andrew. You're grieving the loss of your past, the loss of your family as you understood it, the loss of your own identity. It's a form of trauma that is almost unique in its cruelty. And Clara, Andrew whispered, the name a fresh wound. She's been living off my stolen future. Her whole privileged life was built on my death. It's natural to feel anger, resentment, and a deep sense of injustice towards her as well, Kendall affirmed. She was a direct beneficiary of their deception. This isn't a simple betrayal, Andrew. It's a systemic one, affecting every aspect of your life and your perception of yourself. Andrew slumped back in the chair, exhausted by the sheer effort of articulating the raw, unbearable truth. He hadn't realized how much he'd been holding inside, how desperately he needed to say these things out loud to someone who understood, someone who didn't judge. "We're going to work on this, Andrew," Kendall said, her voice firm but kind. "We're going to help you process this grief, this trauma. We're going to help you rebuild your sense of self, to reclaim your identity not just legally but psychologically. It's a long journey, but you don't have to walk it alone." As Andrew walked out of the Stillpink clinic into the fading afternoon light, a strange calm settled over him. The weight wasn't gone, but it felt acknowledged, somehow lighter for being spoken. He was still a ghost in the system, still reeling from the profound betrayal, still facing an uphill battle against his own family and their flying monkeys. But now he had allies: Sterling, mapping the legal path; Thompson, weaving his digital existence back into the fabric of reality; and Kendall, gently guiding him through the labyrinth of his own pain. The calls from his parents' social circle still came, insistent and accusatory, but he let them ring. He had taken the first steps, tentative but firm, to reclaim his unwritten life. The gilded facade of the thorns was cracking, and soon Andrew knew it would shatter. And when it did, he would be ready to confront the architects of his erased existence. The next step was already forming in his mind: a direct confrontation. The metallic tang of the newly laminated death certificate, an absurd official testament to a life that stubbornly refused to end, clung to Andrew's fingertips. It was the physical manifestation of his parents' colossal betrayal, and he held it like a weapon. The emergency injunction Arthur Sterling had secured had delivered a swift, brutal shock to the gilded cage of Richard and Sylvia Thorne, and by extension to Clara. Andrew had heard the hushed whispers, the frantic phone calls from Aunt Carol, the veiled threats from his mother, a frantic, desperate symphony of their crumbling façade. They wanted him to back down, to accept their convenient narrative of a misunderstanding, a glitch. But Andrew, for the first time in his life, refused to be erased. He was done being a ghost. The family gathering, masquerading as an informal support group, was set for Sunday afternoon at the Golden Bell Chapel's parish hall. His mother had orchestrated it, no doubt, framing it as a moment for familial reconciliation, an opportunity for Andrew to see the error of his ways. He knew it was a performance designed to rally their loyal social circle, the flying monkeys as Arthur Sterling dryly called them, to exert maximum social pressure. They would be there: the smug Mrs. Henderson from the book club, the perpetually judging Reverend Miller, Uncle George with his booming, condescending laugh, Aunt Carol with her practiced frown of concern. Andrew would be the ungrateful villain, the one tearing the family apart over a trifle. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of old paper and ozone still in his nostrils from the solicitor's office. This wouldn't be easy. Nothing about reclaiming his existence had been or would be. He arrived a little late, deliberately. The parish hall of the Golden Bell Chapel, usually a cheerful space for bake sales and community potlucks, felt suffocating. The scent of coffee and cheap biscuits mingled with the heavy perfume of Sylvia and the cloying aftershave of Richard. Sunshine streaming through the stained glass windows cast multicolored patterns across the polished floor, illuminating the faces of about 20 flying monkeys arranged in a semicircle around a long table laden with refreshments. Andrew stood in the doorway for a moment, letting their collective gaze fall upon him. He saw the instant shift. The polite smiles faltered, whispers died, heads turned. Richard, at the head of the table, puffed out his chest, his face a mask of wounded dignity. Sylvia, beside him, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a practiced gesture that used to make Andrew feel guilty. Not anymore. Clara wasn't there. That was unexpected. Andrew had assumed she'd be part of the front line, her usual bright, oblivious self, ready to scold him for upsetting their parents. Her absence gave him a fleeting, unsettling sense of an impending storm. "Andrew, darling, so glad you could make it," Sylvia said, her voice a little too high, a little too saccharine. She rose, arms outstretched, clearly intending to embrace him in front of their audience. He took a step back, preventing the contact. A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Mother," Andrew acknowledged, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. He met her gaze, seeing the flicker of surprise, then irritation in her eyes. "Richard, everyone." He swept his gaze across the room, lingering on Reverend Miller's disapproving scowl and Mrs. Henderson's tightly pursed lips. "We were just discussing this unfortunate misunderstanding," Richard began, attempting to sound authoritative, though a tremor betrayed him. "Your mother and I are deeply concerned about the legal action you've initiated. It's truly unnecessary, Andrew, and frankly quite hurtful." "Hurtful?" Andrew echoed, a bitter laugh escaping him. He walked slowly to the table, deliberately making his way to the empty seat beside Aunt Carol, who flinched as he approached. He didn't sit. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, his hand closing around the stiff paper. He pulled it out, holding it up for everyone to see. It was a single, innocuous-looking document. "This, Richard Sylvia, is what I call hurtful," Andrew said, his voice gaining strength, resonating through the suddenly silent hall. He laid the certificate on the polished wood table. It landed with a soft yet impactful thud. Its stark black and white text, the official seals, were visible to all the straining necks. He tapped it with a finger. "It's my death certificate, issued 5 years ago. My parents signed off on it, said I died of complications from a sudden illness." A collective, stunned intake of breath. The flying monkeys exchanged bewildered glances. Reverend Miller's jaw slackened. Mrs. Henderson's eyes, usually so sharp with judgment, were wide with shock. That's preposterous," Richard blustered, his face turning an angry shade of red. He pushed himself up, leaning across the table, his hand reaching for the document. "Andrew, this is an outrageous fabrication." "Is it?" Andrew calmly pushed the certificate slightly out of Richard's reach. "Because Oliver Dyson, a junior archivist at City Hall, confirmed it. He saw the filing, he saw your signatures, he even saw the fabricated funeral expenses you claimed, Mother. Also, you could access Uncle Marcus's trust, the trust he left me." He watched the carefully constructed masks on Richard and Sylvia's faces crack. Sylvia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting around the room, assessing the damage. Richard sputtered, losing his composure. "This is a private family matter, Andrew. You shouldn't be airing this in public. You're disgracing us." "Disgracing you?" Andrew laughed again, a harsh, humorless sound. "You didn't just steal from me, you killed me. Legally, I haven't existed for 5 years. You erased your son for a beach house, for luxury cars, for Clara's tuition, for an entirely fabricated life built on my stolen inheritance." His voice rose, filled with the pent-up anguish of half a decade. "I didn't apply for financial aid because I was being a petulant child, Richard. I applied because you told me you couldn't afford my Ivy League dreams, while simultaneously draining my millions to fund your opulent existence and Clara's golden child life. You buried me alive for money." The parish hall was utterly silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The flying monkeys, frozen in their seats, looked from Andrew's blazing eyes to the crumpled, defiant faces of Richard and Sylvia. The sheer audacity of declaring their own son dead, not just to steal but to erase him, was a truth too monstrous to dismiss as a misunderstanding. The veneer of the Thorns' impeccable public image, so meticulously polished over years of church donations and charity galas, shattered into 1,000 glittering, ugly pieces. Sylvia finally found her voice, a raw, desperate whisper. "How could you, Andrew? How could you do this to your family, to us?" Andrew looked at her, his expression cold. "I'm doing this to exist. You chose to not have a son, now you have to live with the consequences." He swept up the death certificate, folded it precisely, and tucked it back into his pocket. "Enjoy your biscuits, this conversation is over." He turned and walked out, leaving behind a room filled with uncomfortable silence, whispered accusations, and the bitter taste of shattered illusions. The confrontation had been brutal but necessary. He felt a strange lightness, a sense of having finally exhaled 5 years of unspoken pain, but the battle was far from over. Clara Thorne's carefully curated world began to unravel, not with a bang, but with a series of humiliating, increasingly frantic phone calls. It started subtly, a declined credit card at her favorite boutique near campus. "System error, darling," her mother had chirped, "just use your debit card." Then the debit card failed at the campus bookstore just as she was about to pay for her new textbooks. "The bank must be having issues, honey," Richard had assured her, "we'll sort it out tonight." But tonight never came. The calls to her parents grew more desperate, and their reassurances more strained, eventually replaced by clipped, frantic apologies, then outright evasions. The real hammer fell on a Tuesday morning. Clara was just leaving her modern, sun-drenched apartment, pulling on the keys to her leased Audi, a Ford convertible, when she saw the campus security officer and a stern-faced woman in a business suit waiting by her door. "Ms. Thorne," the woman asked, holding up an official-looking document, "I'm here regarding your tuition account." Clara's heart seized. "My tuition, it's paid. My parents always handle it." "There have been several return checks, Ms. Thorne, and your current balance reflects non-payment for the entire semester. As per university policy, you've been placed on immediate academic probation, and per the terms of your student housing agreement, you must vacate the premises by the end of the day." The words were delivered without a flicker of emotion, each one a death knell. "What? No, that's impossible." Clara felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone. Her mother didn't answer. Her father's line went straight to voicemail. She called again and again until the woman cleared her throat impatiently. There's also the matter of your vehicle, Miss Thorne. A tow truck previously hidden around the corner rumbled into view, its flatbed ominously empty. The lease payments have also defaulted. The bank has initiated repossession. Clara watched horrified as a burly man attached hooks to the pristine Audi. The humiliation was crushing, suffocating. Her entire life, so carefully constructed on a foundation of effortless privilege, was crumbling around her. She was a thorn, a socialite, a golden child. Things like this didn't happen to her. Not to the daughter of Richard and Sylvia Thorne, pillars of the community, benefactors of the Golden Bell Chapel, residents of the exclusive gilded enclave. She pleaded, she argued, she cried. It was useless. By evening, her designer luggage was packed, her apartment stripped bare, and the Audi was gone. She made the ignominious journey back to the gilded enclave in a taxi, her phone dead, her composure shattered. The mansion, usually a sanctuary of quiet luxury, was a maelstrom of barely contained chaos. Richard was packing the imported marble foyer, shouting into his phone, his face blotchy and veins throbbing in his neck. Sylvia was perched on a velvet sofa, still in her expensive day dress, sipping wine, her eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. Boxes, some half-packed, some still taped shut, were scattered haphazardly around the grand entrance. A distinct, acrid smell of burnt plastic mingled with the expensive air fresheners. "What's going on?" Clara demanded, her voice shaky. Richard slammed the phone down. "What's going on? What's going on, Clara? Your brother is what's going on. That ungrateful little snake has frozen every single one of our accounts. Every last penny, he's ruined us." He can't do that," Clara stammered, the full weight of her day's events crashing down. "My tuition, my car, I was expelled." Sylvia looked up, her gaze hollow. "Expelled? Oh, Clara, my poor baby." There was no real comfort in her tone, only self-pity. "It's all Andrew's fault. He's always been so jealous, so vindictive." "Jealous? What are you talking about? He barely had enough for books last semester." Clara's mind raced, trying to reconcile the narrative with the reality. Andrew, the quiet, studious one, always a little out of place in their opulent home. She remembered her parents dismissing his Ivy League dreams, saying they couldn't afford it, even as they gifted her a new car and paid for her lavish apartment. But if Andrew had been jealous, it had been a silent, almost invisible resentment. This was an open war. He's claiming we stole his inheritance," Richard spat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Some preposterous lie about Uncle Marcus's money. It's insane. We just managed the assets for the family." Clara stared at her parents, the raw desperation in their voices, the chaos in their perfect home, the lies. She remembered the scene Andrew had created at the chapel. She hadn't been there, but Aunt Carol had called, breathless with shock, repeating Andrew's chilling words, "You killed me. Legally, I haven't existed for 5 years. You erased your son for a beach house." For the first time, a cold, sickening dread began to settle in Clara's stomach. Could it be true? Could her life, her privilege, her every comfort truly be built on such a monstrous lie? Andrew watched Clara's leased Audi being towed from his own apartment window. He hadn't sought it out, his window simply overlooked the route from the university. A grim satisfaction coiled in his gut, immediately followed by a wave of something else, grief perhaps, or just profound sadness. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. This was the consequence of their actions, finally landing on a tangible, physical person. He saw Clara, a small, slumped figure talking to the campus officer, then getting into a taxi, her shoulders trembling. The reality of what she was about to lose and what she was about to learn was crushing. Arthur Sterling had advised patience, but Andrew knew he couldn't wait. The emotional dam had broken at the chapel. He needed to confront Clara, to shatter her gilded illusion just as his own had been shattered years ago. He needed her to understand the cost, not just to him, but to her own soul. He had Howard Stout's forensic ledger, a meticulously detailed document tracing every dollar of Uncle Marcus's inheritance from the moment it was seized 5 years ago to its current, meager remnants. Every luxury, every bill paid, every indulgence meticulously sourced and accounted for. He called Clara, she didn't answer. He tried again, still nothing. Finally, he sent a text, "I know you're home, I'm coming over, we need to talk, alone." He arrived at the gilded enclave a few hours later. The wrought iron gates, usually so imposing, felt almost mocking now. He rang the bell, and to his surprise, Clara herself opened the heavy oak door. Her eyes were puffy, her usually impeccable hair disheveled. She wore a faded university hoodie, not the designer clothes he was accustomed to seeing her in. The chaos inside the house was even worse than he'd imagined, boxes everywhere. A half-eaten meal on the expensive coffee table, an aura of desperation clinging to the air like a shroud. "Andrew," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to her usual confident tone. What do you want? I want you to understand, Clara, he said, stepping past her into the foyer. Richard and Sylvia were nowhere in sight. Good, not just what they did, but what you benefited from, what your life was built on. He took a seat in one of the pristine, untouched armchairs, placing a heavy bound folder on the table between them. Clara sat opposite him, her gaze wary, defensive. My life is a mess right now, thanks to you, she retorted, her voice regaining a hint of its usual bite but laced with panic. I'm expelled, my car's gone, they say you've ruined everything. They say that, do they? Andrew opened the folder, revealing pages of neatly tabulated data, charts, and transaction records. Take a look, Clara. This is Howard Stout's forensic accounting. He's the best. He tracked every single dollar. He slid the first page across the table. It was a summary. Clara leaned forward, her brow furrowed. She scanned the numbers, her eyes widening. What is this? Vault Estate Trust, initial value $4,250,000. She looked up, confused. What does that have to do with me? That, Clara, was Uncle Marcus's inheritance, left to me to pay for my education to start my life. That was 5 years ago, coincidentally around the time I was officially declared dead. Andrew's voice was low, cutting. Now look at the next column, disbursements, Richard and Sylvia Thorne. He flipped the page, revealing a detailed expenditure list. Your tuition at Pembroke University, $60,000 a year plus living expenses, paid from my trust. Your Audi A4 lease payments, $750 a month from my trust. The down payment on your apartment 2 years ago, a gift from mom and dad, also from my trust. He pointed to an entry, $15,000, Pembroke University spring break, Clara's expenses. Clara's face, already pale, drained of all color. She stared at the ledger, then at Andrew, her lips parted in a silent gasp. The numbers were undeniable. The dates, the amounts, the descriptions, it wasn't some abstract concept of stolen money. It was her money, her clothes, her trips, her effortless life. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, this is wrong. My parents wouldn't. They wouldn't do this. They did, Clara, Andrew said, his voice hard. They forged my death certificate to access it. They told me they couldn't afford for me to go to an Ivy League school while they spent millions of my money to make you the golden child. Every luxury you've enjoyed, every expense, every gift they gave you, it was all funded by the inheritance they stole by erasing me. You weren't just a beneficiary of their generosity, Clara. You were a beneficiary of fraud, a receiver of stolen goods. He watched the realization dawn in her eyes, a slow, agonizing dawning of truth. Her breath hitched. She looked around the opulent foyer at the designer furniture, the expensive art, all bought with money that should have been his. Her parents' carefully constructed narrative, the perfect family, the benevolent providers, shattered before her very eyes. She saw the glittering façade for what it was, a cruel, monstrous lie. I didn't know, she finally stammered, tears welling up. I swear, Andrew, I had no idea. Maybe not, Andrew conceded, his voice softening slightly, though the pain was still sharp. But now you do, and ignorance, Clara, isn't always an excuse. He closed the ledger. They didn't just hurt me, they corrupted you, and they used you as a shield for their greed. Your entire privileged life, Clara, was built on my death. He stood up. Think about that when you decide whose side you're really on. He left her sitting there, surrounded by the wreckage of her parents' deceit, the ledger open on the table, her face a mask of devastating realization. He had delivered his truth, and the gilded façade that had protected Clara for so long had finally, irrevocably cracked. Graham Akin, CEO of Akin Holdings, was a man who understood the language of assets. He understood their value, their potential, and more importantly, how to acquire them. The Echo Block, a sprawling 5-story brick building in the rapidly gentrifying West End, was prime real estate. Its ornate cornices, a testament to early 20th century grandeur, were currently obscured by abandoned scaffolding, a symbol of its stalled potential. Graham had been circling it for months, watching its value stagnate under the trusteeship of Richard and Sylvia Thorne. He saw an opportunity for a major redevelopment, envisioning luxury condos and high-end retail where dust and decay currently reigned. His acquisition team had been in advanced negotiations with the Thornes' representatives for weeks. The deal was complex, involving multiple legal entities and trust agreements, but Graham thrived on complexity. Then the asset freeze hit, not a gradual slowdown but an abrupt total halt. What do you mean, frozen? Graham's voice, usually a calm baritone, held a rare edge of annoyance. He stared at his lead attorney, Marcus Dunn, across the polished mahogany of his executive suite in the Sterling Tower. The city hummed distantly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but in this room, only the low hum of expensive air conditioning and the tension between them prevailed. The entire Vault Estate Trust, Mr. Akin, Dunn explained, adjusting his tie nervously. All assets, including the Echo block, are subject to an emergency injunction filed by a solicitor named Arthur Sterling. It's a rather unusual case. Unusual how? Graham leaned back, his keen eyes narrowing. He prided himself on foreseeing complications. This one had blindsided him. Well, sir, the beneficiary of the trust, Andrew Vault, was apparently declared legally deceased 5 years ago by his parents, Richard and Sylvia Thorne. Now he's very much alive, and he's suing them for fraud and identity theft to reclaim his inheritance. Graham Akin paused, a slow smile spreading across his face. Legally dead, and now he's not. That's a new one. He found himself intrigued despite the temporary disruption to his plans. This wasn't just a legal skirmish, it was a societal anomaly. So the current trustees don't actually own the property or any of the assets. Precisely, Dunn confirmed. And the validity of the original transfer of trusteeship from Uncle Marcus's estate, based on a fraudulent death certificate, is now entirely in question. Graham tapped his fingers on the table. This was messy, very messy. It wasn't just a hurdle, it was a legal quagmire. But quagmires, in Graham's experience, often presented new, even larger opportunities. If the Thorns had obtained the assets fraudulently, and if the true beneficiary was now attempting to reclaim them, then the assets were not just distressed, they were in a state of unprecedented legal limbo. His initial strategy had been to buy from the Thorns, exploit their neglect, and turn a profit. Now the game had changed. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling city. Find out everything, Marcus, every detail about this Andrew Vault, his legal team, the particulars of this death certificate, how long this injunction is expected to last. This isn't just about the Echo block anymore. This is about a multi-million-dollar estate held by a family in disrepute with an entirely new, highly unusual claimant. His mind, sharp and calculating, began to pivot. An individual who had been declared dead, then resurrected by the legal system, was a powerful, sympathetic figure. And if he was successful in reclaiming his inheritance, he would be a wealthy one. Graham Akin didn't like loose ends, he didn't like deals falling apart, but he understood leverage, he understood unique situations, he needed to understand Andrew Vault. Was he a naive college student easily bought out? Or was he a determined individual who would fight for what was his, even if it meant disrupting the powerful? Either way, Akin Holdings would position itself to benefit. The Echo block was still ripe for the taking, but perhaps not from the hands he had originally anticipated. Sloane Qureshi believed that the most significant truths often lay buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and public indifference. From her perch at the Citizens' Pulpit, bustling, repurposed industrial building filled with the aroma of roasted coffee and the clatter of keyboards, she hunted for those truths. Her independent online blog and video channel, Unwritten Narratives, had built a reputation for exposing systemic injustices and giving a voice to the voiceless. And the story that had just started to trickle through the city's informal networks felt like the biggest narrative she'd ever encountered. It started with a cryptic email from an anonymous source, likely Oliver Dyson, a junior archivist Sloane had cultivated a cautious relationship with over the years. The subject line, Ghost in the Machine. The body, a single understated sentence, check the Vault Estate Trust and cross-reference with Thorne family assets. Something unprecedented is happening in vital records. Sloane's journalistic instinct screamed. Unprecedented in vital records usually meant fraud, but the source's tone, usually dry, hinted at something far more profound. Then came the broader murmurs, the sudden dramatic asset freeze affecting Richard and Sylvia Thorne, prominent local philanthropists, their credit cards declining, property sales mysteriously halted. And the whispers from the Golden Bell Chapel, filtering through to her network of community activists, spoke of a tense family gathering where the elder Thorns had been publicly accused of monstrous deceit by their own son. He held up a death certificate, her source from the chapel recounted, their voice still shaky over the phone, and said they'd declared him legally dead 5 years ago to get rich. I swear, Sloane, it was like something out of a movie. A man declared legally dead by his own parents to steal his inheritance. Sloane felt a thrill, a deep journalistic pulse that indicated she was on the verge of something monumental. This wasn't just financial fraud, this was an existential crime. A profound violation of identity, a narrative that resonated with her own mission to challenge powerful systems and expose how easily an ordinary person could be erased. She set up her multi-monitor workstation in the pulpit's co-working space, the scent of espresso and low murmur of conversation a familiar backdrop. She began with open-source intelligence, public records of the Vault Estate Trust, news archives about the Thorne family's charitable activities, which ironically now seemed a thinly veiled attempt to build a flawless public image, property records, social media profiles. Richard and Sylvia Thorne, pillars of the community, photographed at galas making grand pronouncements. And then Clara Thorne, the golden child, her Instagram a cascade of luxury travel, designer clothes, and carefree smiles. No mention of Andrew, ever. Sloane felt a surge of empathy for Andrew Vault. To be so thoroughly erased not by a faceless corporation or a distant government but by your own flesh and blood. The psychological toll would be immense. But his fight for existence, if true, was a story that needed to be told not just for him, but for every individual who had ever felt invisible, overlooked, or erased by the powerful. She started compiling a timeline, cross-referencing public records with the anonymous tips. The dates of Andrew's supposed death, the sudden increase in the Thorns' visible wealth, Clara's increasingly extravagant lifestyle, all aligned with chilling precision. This wasn't a glitch. This was a calculated 5-year-long act of profound betrayal. Sloane knew Arthur Sterling by reputation, a meticulous, old-school solicitor with a fierce sense of justice. He was not one to back down. This case, with its dramatic twists and profound human element, had the potential to explode into a national conversation about identity, family, and the dark underbelly of wealth. She picked up her phone, eyes still scanning the data. "Arthur Sterling and Associates," she said once the receptionist answered. "This is Sloane Qureshi from Unwritten Narratives. I'm calling about the Andrew Vault case. I believe I have some information that might be relevant, and I'd like to arrange an interview with Mr. Vault and Mr. Sterling. This story needs to be heard." She paused, her finger hovering over the record button on her portable voice recorder. "And I intend to be the one to tell it." Her pursuit of truth, fueled by a mixture of professional ambition and genuine empathy, had begun. Andrew felt hollow after the confrontation with Clara. The bitter taste of exposing the truth, even to someone who needed to hear it, lingered. He had seen the shock, the dawning horror in her eyes, and a part of him, the older, more forgiving part, felt a pang of regret. But the larger part, the part that had been legally murdered, knew it had been necessary. She had been living a lie, and he had ripped away the veil. His sessions with Kendall Newman at the Stillpint Clinic had begun to chip away at the layers of trauma, helping him process the profound violation of his identity. She had taught him that even necessary confrontations could be painful, that setting boundaries was an act of self-preservation, not aggression. He found himself thinking of Uncle Marcus's whispering conservatory, a place of beautiful decay. It felt like a metaphor for his own life, broken, overgrown, but with a resilient core of life still fighting to thrive. He hadn't visited it yet, but the thought of its quiet solitude offered a strange comfort. Arthur Sterling called him later that evening. "Andrew, a journalist named Sloane Qureshi from Unwritten Narratives has been in touch. She's tenacious. She knows a surprising amount and she wants to tell your story." Andrew hesitated. Public exposure. The idea was daunting. His life had been about quiet anonymity, then quiet erasure. Now the spotlight. "She sees the social implications, Andrew," Sterling continued. "The narrative of the living ghost. It could be incredibly powerful for your case, but it could also open you up to immense scrutiny. It's your decision." Andrew thought of the quiet shock in the Golden Bell Chapel, the way the flying monkeys had scattered. He thought of Clara's devastated face. He thought of his own years spent feeling invisible. Perhaps it was time to be seen, to be undeniably, irrevocably alive. "Arrange a meeting, Arthur," Andrew said, his voice firm. "I'll talk to her. My story deserves to be heard." He hung up, a sense of grim determination settling in. The confrontations had started, the gilded façade was cracking, and the whispers were becoming a roar. The next step would be the courtroom, where the full, unyielding weight of the law would finally be brought to bear. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. He was no longer a ghost. He was Andrew Vault, and he was fighting for his very existence. The grand façade of the Veritas courthouse loomed, a stoic sentinel of gray granite and polished brass, its formidable presence casting a long shadow over the bustling street below. Andrew Vault felt a prickle of cold sweat on his palms as he ascended the wide, worn steps, each stone groaning beneath a century of footsteps, each echoing the weight of countless lives judged within these walls. He paused at the top, taking a deep, shuddering breath of the crisp autumn air, steeling himself against the onslaught he knew awaited him. Today, his life, or rather, his death, would be laid bare. Arthur Sterling, a pillar of calm beside him, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Ready, Andrew?" Sterling's voice was a low, steady rumble, a comforting anchor in Andrew's roiling sea of nerves. Taylor Sutton, Sterling's junior associate, offered a small, encouraging smile from his other side, her bright, determined eyes mirroring Andrew's own resolve, though tempered by her professional demeanor. "As I'll ever be, Mr. Sterling," Andrew replied, his voice betraying a slight tremor. He adjusted the knot of the tie Sterling had insisted upon, feeling the unfamiliar constriction around his throat, a physical manifestation of the chokehold his parents had held on his very existence. They pushed through the heavy, ornate brass doors into the echoing marble halls, the vast space immediately swallowing the cacophony of the city, replacing it with a hushed reverence. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, polished wood, and something else, a faint metallic tang that Andrew instinctively identified as the smell of raw anxiety. Reporters, already clustered near the main courtroom doors like vultures, parted momentarily, their camera flashes momentarily blinding. Sloane Qureshi was among them, unmistakable with her vibrant scarf and fierce gaze, already live streaming from her phone, a small army of dedicated viewers watching her every move. She offered Andrew a subtle nod, a silent promise of advocacy. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was a heavy cloak. The tiered public gallery was already half full, a morbid curiosity drawing faces Andrew vaguely recognized from his parents' social circle, the flying monkeys Sterling had so aptly dubbed them. They sat, whispering, their eyes flitting nervously between Andrew's entrance and the defense table. And there they were, Richard and Sylvia Thorne seated beside their counsel, a slick, self-assured man named Mr. Harrington. Richard, ever the picture of carefully curated success, wore an impeccably tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed. Sylvia, clad in a designer dress, clutched a silk handkerchief, dabbing delicately at her dry eyes, a performance for the gallery she had perfected over years of social manipulation. They both ignored Andrew, their faces etched with what they clearly intended to be dignified indignation, a carefully crafted expression of aggrieved innocence. Andrew's gaze, however, lingered on his mother's hands, which were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. The subtle tremor betrayed the crack in their façade. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Shaw, a woman with a sharp, intelligent gaze and a reputation for unyielding fairness, entered, and the room snapped to attention. All rise. The rustle of movement, the creak of benches, then a profound silence. Be seated, she commanded, her voice firm, slicing through the tension. Sterling began his opening statement, his voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of theatrics. He laid out the case with the precision of a master surgeon, dissecting the narrative of Andrew's life, or rather, the calculated erasure of it. He spoke of Uncle Marcus, a man of unconventional wisdom and profound love for his nephew, who had established a trust fund designed to secure Andrew's future, specifically for his education. He then moved inexorably to the unspeakable act. 5 years ago, Sterling began, his eyes fixed on the jury, Andrew Vault, a vibrant young man then 20 years old, was declared dead. His parents, Richard and Sylvia Thorne, presented official documentation to the state. They mourned. They received condolences. They, as fiduciaries, took control of his inheritance, the very funds Uncle Marcus intended for Andrew's education and future. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. But Andrew Vault was not dead. He was, as we will demonstrate, very much alive. A living ghost, erased from the public record by the very people who brought him into this world, all for the calculated sum of his inheritance. Andrew watched his parents' faces. Richard's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his temple. Sylvia shot a venomous glare at Sterling, then quickly composed herself, returning to her aggrieved posture. They truly believed they could charm their way out of this, Andrew realized with a sickening lurch. They truly believed their narrative of devoted parents wronged by an ungrateful son would win. Mr. Harrington, their lawyer, followed with a bluster of indignation. He painted Andrew as a misguided, troubled youth, prone to exaggeration, who was now attempting to exploit his loving, generous parents for financial gain. This is a tragic misunderstanding, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. A clerical error, perhaps, but certainly not the calculated, monstrous betrayal Mr. Sterling suggests. My clients, the Thornes, have been nothing but pillars of their community, devoted to their children, showering them with love and support. This young man is simply ungrateful, lashing out at his benefactors. Andrew felt a hot surge of anger, but Taylor's hand on his forearm was a silent reminder to remain composed. He met his parents' triumphant, dismissive glances with a blank stare. Let them believe it, he thought. Let them dig their own graves with their lies. The first piece of evidence Sterling presented was not an abstract financial ledger, but something far more visceral, far more human. It was Andrew's death certificate. Exhibit A, Sterling announced, his voice reverberating through the hushed courtroom, the official document stating the demise of Andrew Vault, born September 14, 1998, deceased March 22, 2018. A laminated copy was projected onto a large screen for the jury and public to see. The cold, official typeface, the stark declaration of non-existence, slammed into Andrew with the force of a physical blow. 5 years. 5 years he hadn't existed officially. 5 years of breath, thought, dreams, all nullified by a piece of paper signed by his mother and father. The forged signature of a doctor, the official stamp of a registrar. It was all there, damning and undeniable. His parents looked away, their carefully constructed composure beginning to fray. Richard shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance. Sylvia began to chew on her lip, the silk handkerchief forgotten. Next, Sterling introduced a series of invoices for a modest private funeral service, a burial plot, and a headstone, all meticulously paid for by the Vault Family Trust. The funeral, of course, had never taken place. There had been no burial, no headstone, just Andrew alive and oblivious studying for his SATs while his parents quietly, efficiently buried him on paper. "We will demonstrate," Sterling continued, "that every penny of these funeral expenses was, in fact, diverted directly into the personal accounts of Richard and Sylvia Thorne, disguised as legitimate trust expenditures." This was Howard Stout's cue. The forensic accountant, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a mind like a steel trap, took the stand. Howard, with his perpetually cynical gaze and meticulous nature, was perfectly suited to the task of unraveling the Thornes' financial tapestry of deceit. He spoke in a dry, almost monotone voice, but every word was a hammer blow, striking at the heart of their defense. He presented, on an even larger digital display, a comprehensive forensic accounting ledger, a labyrinth of interconnected spreadsheets, bank statements, and investment portfolios. This wasn't just a handful of suspicious transactions. This was a complete systematic drain. "This chart," Howard began, pointing to a vivid color-coded diagram, "shows the initial balance of the Marcus Vault Trust Fund immediately after his passing and the designation of Andrew Vault as the sole beneficiary for educational and future living expenses. Approximately $4.3 million. He clicked, and the screen transitioned to a dizzying array of outgoing transactions, each meticulously categorized and cross-referenced. Over the course of 5 years, following the fraudulent declaration of Andrew Vault's death, we see a consistent pattern of transfers. He detailed the expenditures with dispassionate precision. $175,000 allocated for a memorial garden for Andrew, funds immediately funneled into a landscape redesign for the Thornes' personal residence, the Gilded Enclave. Another click, a quarterly allowance of $30,000, ostensibly for maintenance of family legacy assets, which directly corresponded with Sylvia Thorne's designer wardrobe purchases, documented here by store receipts and credit card statements. The courtroom was utterly silent, save for the scratching of pens from the jury and the low, professional clicks of Howard navigating his presentation. Andrew watched his parents. Richard's face was now a mask of ashen gray. Sylvia, no longer dabbing at her dry eyes, stared blankly at the screen as if the numbers, the irrefutable evidence of her own greed, were a foreign language. "Here," Howard continued, pointing to a series of large, bold numbers, "we have the acquisition of a luxury convertible for Clara Thorne, Andrew's sister, costing $85,000 paid directly from the trust, disguised as an investment in a company vehicle for a family-owned venture, which, as our investigation shows, does not exist." He then showed tuition payments for Clara's university payments that abruptly stopped when the emergency injunction froze the remaining assets. The cost of her luxury apartment, her lavish trips, her entire golden child existence laid bare as a direct consequence of Andrew's financial erasure. In total, Howard concluded, his voice still flat yet resonating with a chilling finality, over $4,187,612.47 of Andrew Vault's rightful inheritance was systematically diverted and spent by Richard and Sylvia Thorne during the period of his legal death. Mr. Harrington's cross-examination was feeble, a desperate attempt to poke holes in a fortress of data. "Mr. Stout, isn't it true that accounting can be interpreted in many ways? These are simply family expenses generously paid by concerned parents." Howard merely blinked. "My findings are based on a meticulous trace of funds, matched against invoices, bank records, and the stated purpose of the trust, Mr. Harrington. The money flowed from the trust through various accounts directly to fund the personal luxuries of Richard and Sylvia Thorne and their daughter Clara. The interpretations of those facts, sir, are for others to decide." His gaze flickered to the jury, then back to Harrington. It was a subtle yet devastating jab. As Howard Stout stepped down, the air in the courtroom felt charged, heavy with the weight of undisputed financial truth. The Thornes looked visibly shaken, their earlier confidence dissolving into a desperate, clinging anger. Next, Oliver Dyson took the stand. Oliver, the junior archivist from City Hall, looked significantly less composed than Howard. His usual cynical wit was replaced by a visible nervousness, his hands gripping the railing of the witness box. This was a man who preferred the dusty quiet of archives to the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Andrew felt a pang of gratitude for Oliver, for his quiet courage in risking his stable, anonymous existence to expose a truth that was so deeply buried within bureaucratic layers. Sterling began gently, guiding Oliver through his discovery. Mr. Dyson, can you please state your occupation and explain how you first encountered the name Andrew Vault in relation to your official duties? Oliver cleared his throat. I'm a junior archivist at the City Hall Vital Records Department. My job is to maintain and verify public records. About 5 years ago, a death certificate came through for an Andrew Vault. It was processed standard procedure. He paused, glancing at Andrew with a flicker of empathy. Then, recently, a financial aid application flagged an anomaly for a living Andrew Vault. That triggered a review, my review. And what did you find during that review, Mr. Dyson? Sterling pressed, his voice calm but with an underlying current of anticipation. Oliver swallowed hard. I cross-referenced the death certificate with other available public records, birth records, school enrollments, health records. It was unusual. The death certificate was filed by the parents Richard and Sylvia Thorne. The purported cause of death was listed as accidental drowning. But there was no police report, no coroner's report, no medical examiner's investigation, nothing to corroborate it in the normal channels. He gestured vaguely. Normally, if a death is registered, especially for someone so young, there's a paper trail, a long one. For Andrew Vault, there was nothing, just that one certificate. It was an island of official information disconnected from everything else. And what did you conclude from this lack of corroborating evidence, Mr. Dyson, based on your expertise in public record keeping? Sterling asked. My conclusion was that the death certificate was fraudulent, Oliver stated plainly, his voice gaining strength. The signatures for the attending physician were inconsistent with medical records. The processing timestamps were manually overridden, which is highly irregular for a death certificate. He explained how the digital system would typically flag such a discrepancy, but a specific user with specific override privileges had forced it through. He couldn't name the user, but the implication was clear. Someone with access had intentionally pushed through a false record. Richard Thorne bristled, leaning forward about to interrupt, but his lawyer's hand on his arm restrained him. So, Mr. Dyson, Sterling concluded, you are standing under oath that in your professional opinion as an archivist of vital records, the death certificate for Andrew Vault, filed by Richard and Sylvia Thorne, was a falsified document. Yes, sir, Oliver confirmed, meeting Sterling's gaze. It was a deliberate, fraudulent entry into the public record, designed to erase Andrew Vault's legal existence. A palpable gasp rippled through the gallery. The flying monkeys, who had started the trial with murmurs of support for the Thornes, now exchanged shocked glances. Sylvia buried her face in her hands, her staged distress now replaced by genuine mortification. Outside the courthouse, Sloane Qureshi and her crew from the Citizen's Pulpit were already swarming the steps, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. The Thornes, escorted by a single stoic bailiff, were met with a barrage of questions. Mr. Thorne, did you really fake your son's death? Ms. Thorne, how could you betray your own child? The gilded façade of their lives, once so meticulously maintained, had shattered into a million glittering shards, exposed to the harsh glare of public judgment. Andrew watched from a distance, hidden behind Sterling's broad frame, as his parents, for the first time, seemed truly small, truly lost, their usual bluster dissolving under the relentless questions. He felt nothing, surprisingly, only a deep, pervasive quiet. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, of transfers and signatures, of the slow, methodical process of unwinding 5 years of engineered falsehoods. Andrew moved into a small, furnished apartment arranged by Sterling, a temporary space while his legal identity was fully resurrected. He spent hours with Thompson Uchida, methodically creating a new digital footprint, a web of verifiable existence that would anchor him in the modern world. New bank accounts, utility bills, a driver's license, passport, medical records, each document a painstaking step towards becoming truly, legally, unequivocally Andrew Vault again. Thompson, ever pragmatic and elusive, would often just nod, a ghost himself, as Andrew marveled at the intricate digital scaffolding he was constructing. The more breadcrumbs, the harder to erase, Thompson would say, his fingers flying across multiple glowing screens in the cipher room. surrounded by the hum of servers and the quiet whir of a 3D printer fabricating new identification cards. But the most tangible and arguably most satisfying of Sterling's legal maneuvers was the immediate attachment and impending liquidation of the Thorns' assets. The Gilded Enclave, their sprawling mansion, was the first and most prominent casualty. Andrew didn't want the house. It was a monument to their deceit, a place of painful memories. He wanted nothing from it except the satisfaction of watching its foundation crumble beneath their feet. The morning of the eviction arrived cold and clear, a stark contrast to the emotional maelstrom it portended. Andrew sat in a rented sedan across the street from the Gilded Enclave, the engine idling, the heater blowing a gentle warmth that couldn't quite chase the chill from his heart. Sterling had discouraged him from attending, citing potential emotional distress, but Andrew had insisted. This was the final act, a necessary witnessing. The wrought iron gates, once an imposing barrier of wealth and exclusivity, now hung slightly ajar, stripped of their digital entry system. Two sheriff's deputies stood by the front door, their uniforms crisp, their faces impassive. A moving truck, disappointingly ordinary, was backed up to the circular driveway, its ramp lowered. The emerald lawns, usually immaculate, looked a little less vibrant, the infinity pool a dull, reflective slate under the overcast sky. The illusion of perfection was already fraying. He watched as Richard and Sylvia emerged from the grand front door, not with the regal air they usually exuded, but with a palpable sense of hurried indignity. Richard clutched a worn leather briefcase, his face ashen, his hair disheveled. Sylvia, usually meticulously dressed, wore a designer jogging suit that now looked ironically cheap, a smear of mascara under one eye. They argued in hushed, furious tones, their voices too low to reach Andrew, but the venom in their body language was unmistakable. A small crowd of their former flying monkeys had gathered on the sidewalk, ostensibly out of morbid curiosity, but Andrew recognized the subtle shift in their demeanor. No longer were they offering sympathetic glances or whispered promises of support. Instead, they kept a respectful, almost fearful distance, their gazes a mixture of pity and barely concealed judgment. Their hushed conversations, once a weapon in Richard and Sylvia's arsenal, were now aimed at the Thorns themselves, a subtle yet damning undercurrent of gossip. Andrew saw Mrs. Henderson, Sylvia's closest bridge partner, turn her back as Sylvia frantically waved at her. The isolation was immediate, absolute. Then Clara appeared. She stumbled out, a large, overflowing duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a distraught expression twisting her usually perfect features. Her hair, usually flawlessly styled, was a tangled mess. Her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, darted around, landing on the onlookers with a mixture of shame and fury. The repossessed leased car, the bounced tuition checks, the reality of her parents' fraud had not spared her. She looked utterly lost, a golden child abruptly stripped of her gilding. She caught Andrew's eye, or rather, the glint of the car's window reflecting the sun, and for a fleeting second their gazes seemed to connect across the street. A flicker of something recognition, blame, crossed her face before she looked away, burying her face in her hands. Andrew had planned this moment meticulously. He had discussed it with Sterling, who, after a long silence, had simply said, "Your decision, Andrew, but remember, closure is a personal journey." He opened the car door, the small click echoing in the pre-eviction stillness. He walked across the street, his footsteps deliberate, heavy, each one a testament to his undeniable existence. The sheriff's deputies looked at him, their eyes widening slightly in recognition, but they said nothing. The flying monkeys fell silent, their heads swiveling, sensing the shift in the air. Richard and Sylvia froze, their argument dying on their lips as Andrew approached. Their faces, already contorted with anger and humiliation, now twisted into pure, unadulterated shock. "Andrew," Sylvia gasped, her voice a thin, reedy sound devoid of its usual theatricality. "What are you doing here? You can't be here." Richard, ever the blusterer, recovered first. "This is outrageous. You have no right, boy. This is our home." He puffed out his chest, but the effect was pathetic, a deflating balloon. Andrew stopped a few feet from them, close enough to see the panic in their eyes, the slight tremor in Richard's hand gripping the briefcase. He looked from his mother's horrified face to his father's indignant one, and then his gaze settled on the sprawling mansion, the symbol of everything they had stolen. "It was your home," Andrew said, his voice calm, steady, betraying none of the earthquake raging within him. He watched their expressions, savoring the slow, dawning horror. "Until a few months ago when you took out a second mortgage to pay for your defense. A sizable mortgage at a predatory rate, I might add." He paused, letting that sink in. "It seems you fell behind on payments despite what you told Arthur Sterling's team during discovery." Richard's face went from ashen to a sickly green. "What are you talking about? We made the payments." "Oh, you made some payments," Andrew corrected, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. But then the assets were frozen and the income dried up. Your counsel advised you to fight it, didn't they? To deny everything to try to drag this out, said the judge would never believe such a fantastical story. He glanced at the flying monkeys, who were now listening with rapt attention, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning understanding. Funny, isn't it? How easy it is to believe a fantastical story when the evidence is staring you in the face. Sylvia pointed a trembling finger. You orchestrated this, you told the bank lies. Andrew shook his head. The bank already knew. Arthur Sterling made sure of that. What you didn't know, however, is that while you were scrambling to come up with legal fees and keep up appearances, a certain investment trust quietly bought the debt on this house. He watched their eyes widen, a dawning horror stealing over them, far more potent than the initial shock of his presence. No, Richard whispered, the bluster finally draining out of him. You didn't. Oh, I did, Andrew confirmed, stepping closer, his gaze sweeping over the house. The Vault Trust now holds the mortgage, and as the beneficiary of the Vault Trust, I am now your landlord. He paused, letting the words hang in the crisp morning air, each syllable a hammer blow to their carefully constructed reality. And I'm here to evict you. Richard stumbled back, bumping into Sylvia. This is illegal, this is extortion, you can't do this. Andrew felt a sudden, fierce rush of power, a cold, hard satisfaction that surprised him. He had thought he would feel only emptiness, but this was something else, justice, retribution. He held up a copy of a document, a foreclosure notice with his name, or rather, the trust's name prominently displayed. The sheriff's deputies are here to ensure the letter of the law is followed, Richard, just as you always insisted, isn't it? The letter of the law. Sylvia let out a choked cry, sinking onto one of the steps, her carefully cultivated elegance utterly abandoned. You monster, you're just like your uncle, cold, calculating, after everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? Andrew's voice rose, a tremor of the old pain finally breaking through his composed facade. You declared me dead, Mother, you erased me. You took my entire future, my education, my legacy, and spent it on this. He gestured broadly at the mansion, now a hollow shell of stolen dreams. On your endless parties, on Clara's expensive whims, on pretending you were something you weren't. He looked at Clara, who had retreated into the shadow of the portico, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at him, and for a moment he saw genuine fear and perhaps a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Even Clara, she believed your lies, we all did. Richard's face contorted, not with regret but with pure, incandescent rage. You ungrateful boy, you think you've won? You'll regret this, you'll be alone. No one will ever forgive you for tearing your family apart. Andrew met his father's furious gaze, an ice-cold resolve settling over him. I've been alone for 5 years, Father, legally, physically, emotionally alone. And it was you who tore this family apart the moment you signed that forged death certificate. You killed me, I'm just reclaiming what's mine, including my right to evict those who stole it. The sheriff's deputies, who had been watching this silent drama unfold, now stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, the lead deputy stated, his voice firm, you need to gather your remaining personal belongings and exit the premises immediately. Any further obstruction will result in arrest. Richard sputtered, but the threat of criminal charges which Sterling had assured Andrew were now very real finally silenced him. He grabbed Sylvia's arm, yanking her up from the step. As they were led past Andrew, their eyes met his one last time. There was no remorse, no apology, only a raw, seething hatred that chilled Andrew to the bone. He watched them get into a small, older car that Richard had evidently managed to scrounge up, driven by a distant relative who kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with the onlookers. The flying monkeys dispersed quickly, not wanting to be associated with the spectacle. The grand gates of the gilded enclave closed, not with a ceremonial clang, but with a quiet, ignoble creak. Andrew stayed for a long time, watching the moving truck. He felt no triumph, no elation, only a profound, aching emptiness that was far more vast than the momentary satisfaction of his revenge. He had won, yes. He had reclaimed his name, his fortune, his very existence, but the cost was everything else. His family, his past, any illusion of a normal life. He was truly alone. In the weeks and months that followed, life recalibrated, not smoothly, but with the grinding gears of a system righting a terrible wrong. Richard and Sylvia faced criminal fraud charges, their public image in tatters, their gilded enclave sold off for a fraction of its former glory. Andrew followed the news reports from a distance, the details clinically observed, no longer emotionally gut-wrenching. Clara, however, was a different story. Stripped of the allowance, the designer clothes, the luxury apartment, and the tuition that now went towards restitution, she found herself truly untethered. He heard through mutual distant acquaintances that she was working a minimum wage job in a coffee shop, struggling to make ends meet. He saw her once from across the street in a faded uniform wiping down tables. She looked tired, vulnerable, and utterly ordinary. Then the messages started. First, a series of frantic texts, then increasingly desperate calls, and finally, a long handwritten letter delivered to Arthur Sterling's office, filled with tear-stained pleas for forgiveness, for understanding, for a chance to talk. Andrew read the letter, his fingers tracing the shaky handwriting. "I didn't know, Andrew. I swear to God, I didn't know. I was so stupid. They just told me what I wanted to hear. Please, I need to talk to you. I miss you. You're my brother." He sat with the letter for days, the words burning into his conscience. Could she truly not have known? Could she have been so blindly wrapped in her privilege, so utterly oblivious to the foundations of her gilded cage? He wanted to believe her, wanted to find a piece of the family he thought he'd lost. But the image of her, basking in the glow of stolen wealth while he struggled, while he was legally dead, was too stark, too painful. He remembered their parents' manipulation, how easily they had gaslit him. Clara had been their golden child, the perfect beneficiary of their fraud. He couldn't risk it, not now, maybe not ever. He placed the letter back in its envelope, a heavy sigh escaping him. He asked Sterling to tell Clara that he was focused on his future, that he needed space. He wasn't sure if he was ready to forgive or if he ever could. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound. He had to choose his own path, unburdened by the ghosts of his past. And so Andrew Vault walked onto the sprawling, historic campus of his dream Ivy League university. The autumn leaves, vibrant reds and golds, crunched under his feet. Students bustled past, their faces eager, hopeful, filled with the boundless energy of youth. He clutched his acceptance letter, a document he had once thought impossible, now a tangible testament to his perseverance. He walked into the admissions office, a grand, wood-paneled room. The administrator, a kind-faced woman with spectacles perched on her nose, smiled warmly. "Mr. Vault, welcome. We're so delighted to have you." He sat down, his heart thrumming with a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. "Thank you, I'm very happy to be here." "Now about tuition," she began, pulling up his file. "We just need to finalize the payment arrangements. You mentioned financial aid, but it seems there was a significant update to your financial profile." She looked up, a knowing twinkle in her eye, no doubt having seen the news reports that had swept the nation. Andrew simply nodded, a quiet strength settling over him. He pulled out a check already prepared by Sterling's office. It was for the full staggering amount of his first year's tuition, in full, no loans, no aid applications. He placed it on the desk. "Here," he said, his voice firm, clear, "paid in full." The administrator's eyes widened, then she smiled, a genuine, appreciative smile. "Well, Mr. Vault, it seems you're ready to truly begin." He finally was. But the journey wasn't just about reclaiming money or identity, it was about reclaiming his soul. Andrew continued his sessions at the Stilpant Clinic with Kendall Newman. Her office, bathed in soft, natural light, felt like a sanctuary, a place where the chaos of his life could be unpacked, examined, and slowly, gently healed. "How do you feel about the eviction, Andrew?" Kendall asked, her voice calm, inviting. Andrew leaned back into the plush therapy chair. "Relief, a strange, cold satisfaction, and an emptiness, like I won, but I also lost everything I once thought I had." Kendall nodded, her gaze empathetic. "That's normal, Andrew. You didn't just lose a family, you grieved your own death. You're building a new life on the ashes of an old one that was built on a lie. It's a profound kind of grief and a profound kind of courage to face it." "I don't know who I am anymore," Andrew admitted, the words catching in his throat. "Or who I'm supposed to be." "You are Andrew Vault," Kendall said softly. "The one who survived, the one who fought back, the one who is now free to write his own story without their poisonous script." She smiled. "That's a powerful identity, Andrew. It's an unwritten life, yes, but that's your greatest strength now. You get to choose every word." He absorbed her words, a nascent hope unfurling in his chest. He still had a long way to go, he knew. The scars of betrayal wouldn't fade overnight, but he was walking forward. A few weeks later, on a cool afternoon, Andrew found himself drawn to the Whispering Conservatory. It was a place Uncle Marcus had cherished, a derelict Victorian glasshouse in a forgotten corner of the city's oldest park. He hadn't been back since the trial, but today he felt an undeniable pull. The rusted iron framework, draped in ancient vines, seemed to sigh in the gentle breeze. Shattered panes of glass filtered the autumn light into shifting patterns, illuminating dancing dust motes and the lush, untamed greenery that thrived within its decay. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sweet perfume of resilient, blooming flowers that defied neglect. He found the moss-covered stone bench where Uncle Marcus used to sit, a quiet observer of life and entropy. Andrew sat closing his eyes, letting the sounds of the conservatory wash over him, the rhythmic drip of condensation, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant, muted hum of the city. He imagined his uncle here, a man who saw beauty in the broken, who understood the resilience of things growing in unexpected places. Uncle Marcus had seen through his parents' deceit, had understood Andrew's worth, and had, in his own eccentric way, given him a chance. This inheritance wasn't just money, it was a future, a foundation for the life he would now build entirely on his own terms. He opened his eyes, looking at a tenacious orchid that had pushed its way through a crack in a terracotta pot, blooming with a surprising vibrancy. Its roots clung to the crumbling earth, yet its flower reached for the broken light. Andrew Vault was a living ghost no longer. He was a student, a survivor, a man unbound. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both potential and the lingering echoes of a profound betrayal. But for the first time in his life, the choices were entirely his own. The page was blank, vast, and waiting. His unwritten life, stretching before him, was finally ready to begin.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button to like it. And please do subscribe to support the channel.